All right, let me bring in trial attorney Tray Gober, and I have to ask you this, Tray. I was a little surprised at the strength of the response from law enforcement, the police chief, as well as from the prosecutors saying we wanted jail time in this case, but on the other hand, you recognize the amount of time and heartache and resources because she falsely reported this crime. Which side do you fall on? Thankfully, there's no jail time like the defense said, or there should have been jail time like the prosecution said.
Let's treat this person like we would any other defendant. So the judge laid out and very well articulated the logic behind his sentence. And just because a case gets picked up and has national attention, the defendant doesn't necessarily control that aspect of the case. And so treat this defendant like you would any other defendant, nonviolent, first-time misdemeanor, where she's accepting responsibility. And I think the judge did the right thing in sentencing without jail time in this particular case.
Yeah, I think he has to hold it the same as any other person in that similar situation. But I have to suggest this. The state mentioned both during court before the sentencing as well as the presser we were just watching that they were a little frustrated, that they didn't know where she was for those 2 days, what she was doing. Could they not have reached a plea agreement that required her to have said more about where she was and what she was doing?
Absolutely, that could have been a requirement. I don't know that it was all that relevant to the question. It's not one of the elements of the charge, certainly, to know why it is that she made a false report to the police. She wasn't making an affirmative defense of duress, or that she was at least temporarily incompetent or insane. So I think to a certain extent there's this curiosity that the public has, that the police have, but I don't know that why she was or where she was at the time of the alleged kidnapping really should make that much of a difference.
Well, that's a really good point, that it doesn't go to the elements. Now we know, and we did hear her in court say that she apologized, that she had made a grave mistake due to emotional issues and distress. She's getting mental health counseling. She'll be ordered to continue to do that she regrets her decision, and that she prays she be granted grace. I would suggest no jail time is grace, but consistent with other offenders in that same circumstance. There's one other thing that I want to discuss with you, Tray, though, and they mentioned it, but I think that we have a full screen because Russell did some internet searches, and the state brought this up. She did things like, do you have to pay for an Amber Alert search? How to take money from a register without being caught? The Birmingham bus station, a one-way bus ticket from Birmingham. The movie Taken, that one stood out to me. Amber Alert and maximum age for an alert. I mean, that sounds like predetermined, doing some research, figuring out how to stage her disappearance. And do you think that was really considered, or do you think once there's a guilty plea, that's it, and then the judge goes to sentencing?
It's certainly part of it and something the judge can take into consideration. Again, as the prosecution and the police chief pointed out, there seems to have been a loophole for this type of premeditated false reporting versus somebody who just false reports on the fly to the police. So I don't know that any of that should make a huge difference in this particular case. And in the grand scheme of things, of the types of cases that these prosecutors, that police chief, and this judge see on a daily and weekly basis, we all know that it would be a waste of resources to continue to punish her just so that we can feel better about it.
I want to bring back in Tray Gober, Philip Dubé, still with us. Tray, let me start with you. All right, so you have text messages. We know they were doing drug deals, the defendant and this witness, a known drug associate. How does that connect the defendant to the murders?
Well, it certainly connects him to the victims. It provides him potentially a motive in the sense that he owes at least Christine money and, you know, has transactions with them. It starts to line up this surprise that Jenna was there in terms of what's her involvement. Is she a potential risk of exposure or capture, future prosecution? You know, the other thing is this is a hard case for the prosecution because we're talking about alleged victims whose hands aren't necessarily clean. And sometimes juries don't have a lot of sympathy for criminals, criminal victims.